Alexander's new books, I'm going to put it up and we'll put links and stuff, is Know the Real Jesus. And you've touched on this already. Now, this, though it's a new book that he's released, it's not a new topic for him, for his study. You've really invested a lot with courses and teaching and touched in your other books this very important fact of knowing the historical Jesus. And why, I'm going to ask you this question, why is that important for the church and for the world today? Like, why has God pressed that into your heart, knowing the historical Jesus?
Okay. Thank you, David. Before I answer that, I just, if I may just quickly throw in here, David, that for any who may be listening and are interested in terms of our story of Joe Wetto and reconciliation, I have written a book called Doing Reconciliation that tells both the story and lays out a biblical theology of reconciliation and justice, both racially, class, and gender reconciliation. So if anyone's interested, that is available also via Amazon, Doing Reconciliation. But the book, Know the Real Jesus, and the subtitle, A Portrait of the Historical Jesus, for me is really important, and especially if I could put it in Vineyard context. My understanding of where Vineyard is at and where we've come to, both, I would say, I would probably be a bit presumptuous to say internationally, although I travel widely in the Vineyard internationally, but I can't speak internationally. But my experience is this, is that, and it comes from my personal experience, is that we were founded through John and Carol Wimber on the basis of incarnating the kingdom theology or the kingdom of God worldview of Jesus of Nazareth. So that what John Wimber learned primarily through George Eldon Ladd at Fuller, and then also through James Callis, Oscar Kuhlmann, Hermann Kummel, some of the German theologians that Ladd popularized at the time when Wimber was already a Friends, Society of Friends minister, and then left that and joined Chuck Smith and Calvary Chapel and then became Vineyard. Wimber was just completely taken with kingdom theology and had a sense of calling to incarnate the mission, the message, and the ministry of Jesus and the kingdom in local church, and to do the stuff of the kingdom, basically, to be a kingdom community called Vineyard. But what I found, David, is that I started with kingdom theology. So when I met Wimber, I was already starting my academic studies, and through by correspondence at the University of South Africa, and the lecturer in systematic theology prescribed George Eldon Ladd as the prescribed book, both his Presence of the Future and New Testament theology. And I got into kingdom theology. But 10 years later, I discovered, so that was like 1980. 1990, I discovered the first book on the historical Jesus. And then I began to read in 1990 on historical Jesus studies, first through Marcus Borg, then N.T. Wright, and then James Dunn and other authors. And then I realized that actually historical Jesus studies and really knowing the Jesus of history precedes and gave birth to kingdom theology. Because Oscar Kuhlmann and Hermann Kummel and the other German theologians post-World War had been studying the historical Jesus, out of which they understood that the essential mission of Jesus, the reason why he came, was to bring the kingdom, inaugurate the kingdom. And so I had a passion to pursue historical Jesus studies. And for me, in terms of Vineyard, I think we have lived and practiced the kingdom and articulated the kingdom theology. But we've come to a point over the time where there's a lot of debate. Is the Vineyard still into doing the stuff? Or are we becoming seeker-friendly? Or are we becoming more Bethel? Or are we becoming this? Or are we that? And I think the challenge for Vineyard is to rediscover and go further on the kingdom theology by rediscovering the Jesus of history. And historical Jesus studies, for me, was like being born again. The more I read and understood the man Jesus in his humanity, because for me, I was raised, when I thought of Jesus, immediately I thought of him as a divine being. Jesus is the Son of God, a divine being, who died on the cross for my sins and rose again to give me new life. But Jesus, the man in his humanity, to recover that and to actually see how unbelievably radical and remarkable that young 30-year-old rabbi from Nazareth was within his socio-political religious context, whereby he interpreted the context of pain and oppression with the Roman occupation and the 7 different responses in the Judaism of his day, which is called Second Temple Judaism. From the Pharisees, that was a school of thought that responded in a certain way, just obey Torah and God will deliver us. To the Zealots, we can, holy war theology, we must liberate the land and we can kill Romans in God's name. And of course, the Herodian response and the Sadducee response and the Essene response. So there were different schools of thought and parties in Jesus's day within Judaism. And Jesus didn't identify with any of the groups, but actually had his own way of responding and offering to Israel a kingdom of God response, that the kingdom has come. And if Israel repents and turns to God by putting their faith in him and receiving him as the Messiah, then Israel will enter the kingdom. So for me, historical Jesus studies are so important because you catch a vision, a fresh rediscovery of Jesus within his historical context as a human being, young, 30-year-old rabbi who was a prophet who proved to be the Messiah. So I fell in love with Jesus all over again by having a fresh vision of him. And when you see Jesus in a new way, it redefines everything for you. Both Derek Morphew, I put a quote of Derek Morphew in the book, and I also quote Tom Wright, where they both say any significant rediscovery of Jesus redefines. You begin to rethink your theology, you rethink church, you rethink even your life and your leadership. So for me, it's a way of saying, by preaching and teaching Jesus in his historical context, it will refresh and renew the vineyard broadly with a fresh picture of Jesus, where people fall in love with Jesus in a new and deeper way, and thereby live the kingdom and do the kingdom stuff without the sense is that we've got to do kingdom stuff because we're vineyard.
Yeah.
But invert it. We do kingdom stuff because we're passionate about that man, Jesus of Nazareth. We love him. We're his followers. And it's not about how vineyard you are. It's about, are you truly following Jesus of Nazareth and doing what he did the way he did it, and teaching what he taught the way he taught it, and loving who Jesus loved the way he loved. And that's, for me, what it's all about. So hence, this book is really important for all followers of Jesus everywhere. But also for the vineyard, I have a particular passion, obviously, as a vineyard pastor. I wrote this with the vineyard in mind, and I make that point in the introduction that rediscovering the Jesus of history is to fall in love with him and thereby renew kingdom theology in a fresh frame that naturally overflows with a hunger and an appetite to teach what he taught, do what he did, minister the way he ministered, and bring the kingdom the way he brought the kingdom. Because it's all about the king and the kingdom at the end of the day.